What is up, everybody? Welcome to Islanders Overtime with the Elmonters, where you can watch video on YouTube or you can be part of the Twitter space on Twitter for maximum engagement here. We're going to talk about a lot. First off, please, if you like what we've done with the Elmonters, subscribe to our Substack. You get all of our content every morning. It's fantastic. But let's get to this game. I want to obviously talk about it. The Islanders get shut out 4-0 to the St. Louis Blues. Yes, Jordan Binnington was fantastic in this one, but it comes down to one part of this game. Patrick Waugh touched on it after the game. It's allowing 3 goals in 32 seconds. I mean, the Islanders, again, they've done this a lot this year where they just allow goals in bunches. They can't get out of their own way. The first goal is Brandon Saad being left wide open. Second goal is Pavel Buchnevich also being wide open. And the third one is a Pavel Buchnevich goal yet again where just the defensive lapses killed the Islanders. And Anders Lee spoke about it after the game where his line was on the ice for 2 of those 3 goals. So was the Pelech-Pulock pairing. And they got to be better. You know, Waugh calls a timeout and they give up a goal right away after. I mean, that can't happen. That your coach is trying to bail you out, give you a break. Unfortunately for the Islanders, they just cannot stop the bleeding. You feel bad for Varlamov, who went 11 days without playing a game and gets no help right off the bat. I mean, it was a solid start for the Islanders. Got pressure in front of Binnington, got shots on goal, and then just nothing. And again, Binnington was great in this one, but the Islanders lost it, not just allowing 3 goals in 32 seconds, but that penalty kill, which had looked great out of the gate in this one after going 3 for 3 on Tuesday in their overtime win over the Pittsburgh Penguins, just can't get it clear at the right moment, and they fall apart. And just these lapses of judgment, and they have to do a 30 for 30 on what happened to the Islanders' fundamentals after Trotz left. The second point in this game is just the lack of finishing early. You have so many chances in this one. You have Kyle Palmieri point blank a couple of times on the power play. You had 1 goal that went across the goal line. You had Anders Lee breakaway miss. You had a Brock Nelson wide open chance where he missed. You had a Noah Dobson slap pass to Simon Holmstrom. I had the numbers here. 4.29 expected goals against on Binnington. They mean absolutely nothing. That's what Waugh said after the game. The goal differential, the shot differential in this game, he goes, it doesn't matter. All that matters is scoring goals. The Islanders couldn't do it. And the third thing I want to touch on is the line changes. At the end of the second period, Patrick Waugh decided to swap Wahlstrom with Barzal. So it read Lee, Horvat, Wahlstrom. Second line stayed the same. Holmstrom, Pajot, Barzal. Fourth line remained the same. McLean obviously in for Zizekas. But he also changed the defense pairings. Pelech and Pulock struggled. Like I said, they were on the ice for 2 goals against, 2 of the 3 in that second period there. So he went with Pulock with Romanov and Pelech with Dobson, left Riley Mayfield untouched, and of course left Varlamov in the goal. But this is one of those games where you look at the standings. We've talked about it a lot, staying in the playoff race. Well, you had teams win. The Red Wings came back to win. The Lightning lost, which is good. The Devils lost, which is good. Pittsburgh wins. Now they're only 2 points behind the Islanders. And this was a night where the Islanders could have built on, which was a horrific game on Tuesday. They find a way to get 2 points, which is the positive, but it wasn't a great game. It wasn't like you're building on that game. And then tonight you had an opportunity. Again, Binnington was good. And at the end of the day, he was the difference. But allowing 3 goals in 32 seconds, Lee touched on it and said, you know, the issue is that we were chasing 3. If the Islanders allowed 1 goal there and go into a third period down 1, I mean, in theory, they played a very good road game. They got the chances. They got traffic early in front. Binnington was great, but going down 3 against a team that had lost 2 straight but had playing better and they're fighting for their lives, and Binnington stepping up large. I mean, the Islanders need someone to step up, find a way to come through. I thought maybe we'd see a fight at some point, you know, just to turn the tides a little bit. We never got that. So the Islanders fall. Now they go and have a matinee Saturday game. You know, the Islanders are great at that. They host the Tampa Bay Lightning, who they beat 6-2. A couple of weeks ago, they faced Jonas Johansson. They'll probably end up facing Vasilevsky this time around. But again, must wins. Hickey even said it after the game. You know, you lose tonight, doesn't mean the season's over, but you got to start building ground. You got to put a win streak together. If the Islanders are making the playoffs, there needs to be some win streak. They haven't really had a win streak this year. Yes, they had a point streak at the end of December, but tonight was a game where they played well enough to win the game. They just fell apart, and a lack of focus is what happened in Pittsburgh, allowing 2 goals in 56 seconds. Tonight, 3 goals in 32 seconds. That just cannot happen. So we'll open the floor to as many questions, comments. I'm assuming you guys all have a lot on your mind. We're going to start with the YouTube. So again, thanks so much for tuning in for this one. We'll have some great chats here and hope to get to the bottom of your questions, comments, and concerns. But yeah, Islanders losing 4-0 to St. Louis. That's just not going to cut it for the Islanders, who can't have a lack of focus like they've had over these last 2 games. So up first is PHLEX Crew. What do you think the Islanders can do to change up this team as the trade deadline and offseason in favor of retooling in the bottom 6 and possibly trading Pajot and getting a top 6 guy? So if the Islanders, you know, it's going to be my story tomorrow morning, but the Islanders aren't going to sell in terms of selling everything and cleaning house. They can't do that. They're not in a rebuild, especially when you have Sorokin locked up for 8 years. You can't rebuild. Can you retool? Sure, but if they're going to retool, they're going to have to trade parts of the family. And again, certainly might be a need. You look at Pajot, and I like that you brought up Pajot there, because for me, Kyle McLean proved in his first NHL stint that he could be a bottom 6 shutdown center or winger, whatever they want to play him at. He could play both, but center. And you look at Pajot, and they talked about it on the broadcast today, that when the Islanders gave up what they did for Pajot, they thought they were getting a 25-goal scorer, a guy that's going to win 55% or better of his faceoffs and be a premier penalty killer. He hasn't been the goal scorer. The penalty kill this year has obviously not been great at all. And he's winning faceoffs, sure, but not at the highest rate that he has in his career. And then you look, okay, he's getting $5 million a year, where a guy like McLean's getting $800,000. We're in a salary cap world. Again, understood the contract at the time. You thought you were getting something that you're no longer getting. The fact that McLean's been able to come up and produce, making $4.2 million less, makes Pajot expendable. And obviously Pajot has a modified no trade clause of 16 teams. But look at, everyone could say, well, the Islanders have no one to trade. There's no one with value. Pajot to a playoff team looking for a shutdown center with maybe better surrounding players and key personnel, Pajot has value. Brock Nelson, who I don't think is going to get moved, he has value. Kyle Palmieri, who's performing in the playoffs, has value. Cizikas, again, hurt obviously, but value. On the back end, I don't see anyone getting moved in the back end outside of Aho, just because it's so crowded back there. And when they activate Bortuzzo, if he's back, he suffered a setback with a high ankle sprain. He's out indefinitely, but Wahlstrom can get moved as well. The Islanders have pieces to move. It's just whether or not Lou decides to do that. But you look at the Islanders aren't selling to sell. They're going to try to trade players to get better players back, whether it's short-term, which it never is, it's never rentals, but more building for next year. Patrick was here for next year, and I think Lou's going to do what he can to get players that could help now, but also thinking about the future. He always has to think about that. Maybe fans think, well, he trades all these first-round picks, he doesn't care about the future. I get that point, but you bring in a guy like Bo Horvat last year, yes, to go on a playoff run, but they clearly, the focal point of that deal was to sign him, to have him with Barzal long-term. You may not like the Mayfield or Engvall deals, but Engvall's acquired, not as a rental, to sign him long-term, things like that. So the Islanders have options, and I'll be writing about it tomorrow morning for the Hockey News, but yeah, it's going to be really interesting. What are we, 15 to 14 tomorrow, 2 weeks away from the NHL trade deadline. The Islanders could be 4 points in a wild card spot by then, or they could be 15, 16 points out. It's crazy how much could change over a span of 2 weeks. But right now, I don't think the Islanders are selling. I think they could move players, but that's to bring in players they want here for next year. And I just don't see a situation where Lou is doing a fire sale, because, again, at that point, there's not much to do. Moving on here, there's just no urgency or fire in this team. They're just too comfortable with failures. Need to make massive moves. Yeah, I don't see that happening. I just don't see a situation where they go for a fire sale. I really don't. And I think you may want that. And I just don't see it happening. Too many guys are locked up long-term. It's not going to happen. Yes, you could trade players, Scott Mayfield, Pierre Engvall, things like that. You could move players that have a high cap hit, a low cap hit over the years. You could retain salary, things like that. But it's just not going to happen, guys. It's really not going to happen. And I think, again, like I said, they can move certain players, but in terms of fire sale, this team has too many long-term deals locked in, too much already into this core that they're not going to go for a fire sale. And when you have Sorokin, you can't really go into a rebuild, because he's gonna win you the games that you may quote unquote want to lose. Moving on here, seeing how bad Mayfield has been playing, does it change your perspective on his contract? Could we ship him in a deal for Dumba? Now, I think Scott Mayfield is going to be here for a little bit. I don't see a situation where they're trading him. And maybe at some point, again, you could retain, but I don't think moving Mayfield for a Matt Dumba is going to do much. First off, Matt Dumba is not this incredible defender at this point. But it's a movable deal. Right-handed defensemen, big body penalty killers will always have value, but Scott hasn't been healthy at all this year. And I don't know if he is healthy, but again, the mental mistakes, I didn't think he was terrible tonight. I thought for most part of this game, he was good. And I just think Mayfield's going to be your. They could move him. The same way they could move Engvall and retain 50% if they have to. But you have to also find someone that wants him and wants to take him on. And right now, I don't think his value is ultimately high. Again, right-handed defenseman for sure. But yeah, I don't see a situation where Mayfield's getting moved. Now, I think Lou may have to really think about at some point, if this keeps up, maybe next year, thinking about buying him out, things like that. But right now, I think Mayfield's going to be here. Let's see, looking for more questions here. We're going to go to the Twitter space. We have a couple in here. We're going to start with Jason Riley Giambi.
Hey, Stefen. Obviously, tough game. I just, again, I don't want to be the screaming maniac here, but I mean, this is just predictable. I mean, this is exactly what I talked about last summer. I admire Lou Lamoriello. The Islanders were a very poor organization for many years. He brought legitimacy to the Islands. Okay, we had a Hall of Fame coach, Barry Trotz. We had 2 great runs. But this is the problem. He doesn't know how to rebuild. Okay, he hands out 7-year contracts to guys like Scott Mayfield, Pierre Engvall, like they're candy. Even like, Bo Horvath and Matt Barzal. They're excellent players, but they're not like superstars per se. Like that's the problem with the Islanders. They have good players, but none of them are great players. And with him, it's just he keeps putting a Band-Aid and trying out the same team every year. We have the worst farm system in all of hockey. Like, what is even when we contend for the playoffs? Like when Matt Barzal said last year, I want to be a perennial contender. Like even when we compete, we barely squeak in by as wild card 2 and wild card 1. Even last year against the Hurricanes, they were missing like 4 out of the 4 starters on offense, and we still couldn't beat them. I mean, when does it end? Like he just doesn't know how to rebuild.
Yeah, well, again, I don't think he's trying to rebuild.
But that's the problem. Yeah. Like, there's nothing, like, we just keep putting a Band-Aid on a problem that keeps getting worse and worse.
Yeah, and you look at what Lou did in other spots that he was at. Again, when you commit, well, first off, I know Lou spoke today, and he said that he obviously believes in this team. And a GM's never going to, once a GM says he doesn't believe in a team, that's that, right? I mean, that's fireable. And he's always going to say he believes. He's always going to say that he can make it. He's always going to say that he can do things to make the team better when he has the opportunity, that he'll trade picks if he has to. But yeah, you look at the farm system, and maybe there's a couple of diamonds in the roughs that the Islanders could turn in Isaiah George, Maggio, maybe Dufour. But yeah, again, Lou's not worried about the future. I'm not saying it's because he's not going to be here in 2-3 years. We don't know his contract status and when he'll be done or if he gets renewed, things like that. But he's focused on winning now. Patrick Roy was brought in to win now. You may disagree with the way that Lou is operating with this team, but it's a win now team. And you look at this team, it's a win now team. I mean, you look at the stats of them, the few amount of minutes trailing in games, or their 5th fewest minutes trailing in hockey games. And you could argue that talent has a lot to do with closing games out, but I look at it as talented teams find a way to get those leads. They're blowing leads late, or they're having lapses, 32-second lapses, things like that. But yeah, this team is not a team that's going to tank ever under Lou. They're not going to be able to sell off these pieces. You may want that. And in a perfect world, can they just move on from contracts they don't like? If they don't like the Pajot deal anymore, can they just get rid of it? Mayfield, just get rid of it. Engvall, just get rid of it. Things like that. But when we spoke to Lou in Nashville, he actually said that because of the flat cap, if he said that if there was a flat cap, and they knew that it was going to be a flat cap, he wouldn't have signed certain players to deals. He said that in Nashville. And I think a lot of GMs would agree that if they knew that the cap would be the way, they wouldn't have made certain deals. Now, again, I think that Lou said today that he backs the trades he made. Look at the Pajot deal at the time. What he gave up is what he thought he had to give up. And it's hard to argue that. You look at the guys that he got, Palmieri that he signed long-term, Pajot that he signed long-term, Horvath that he signed long-term. Those guys were top players on the market, the trade deadline market. And you had to give that up. But yeah, a couple of those deals, the Pajot deal is coming back to bite them a little bit. The signing your 4th line to longer term deals is coming back to bite the Islanders a bit. And they do have to get younger. I think they're a fast team. You look at a couple of lines, they have speed. It's just they're caught in the situation right now where they have to go for the win now because they don't have the prospects to rebuild. They don't have the assets to get the 1st-round picks back that they want. Again, I don't think they're trading Brock Nelson. If Scott Laughton's getting you a 1st-round pick back, right, then Brock Nelson could easily get you 2 firsts. But it's Lou's willingness to do that. And I just don't think he's going to do that. Go to the Twitter. We're going to go to Isles Den now. Isles Den, just mute your mic for me. Yep. Isles Den, just a mute your mic for me. All right, we're going to come back to Isles Den. Just request to speak again. We're going to go to Josh Elkin.
Hey, what's up, Stefen?
Hey, how are you?
Good, man. At any point, everything Anders is saying post game is just really starting to get on my nerves. I know he's probably got to put on a brave face, but at some point, he's got to call it like it is. And I'm sick and tired of hearing about how they played, 58 good minutes and they had a 30-second mental lapse and this, that, the other thing. And I don't know. I don't think it's, to the point where you're going to take a letter away from him. But, I mean, do you think that there's got to be some change at the top? And then, just project out a little bit. Is an Anders buyout possible this summer? Like, what are we looking at with him?
Well, yeah. I think you look at what Anders Lee said after the game, and that, he was asked if the 32-second lapse was mental. And you saw the face he made, and then you saw what Was said and what Pulak said. And you have to agree. Is there a part of it that's mental to an extent? Yeah, but you watch the plays that they weren't all made because of it was poor decisions, where that's not the same thing as mental lapses, where a player's just not aware. Like, you look at the plays and you break it down. And I posted 3 pictures, but there's turnovers, and turnovers leads to destruction. And you say, okay, it's mental. Look at how the structure is formulated. No, it's damage control after a turnover, after a quick mistake, after a fundamental failure. And the Islanders physically are in the wrong spot. So you could say it's okay, mental. But I do agree with Lee, and I agree with why. It's just the turnovers. And again, you could say turnovers are mental, but you look at all 3 goals that came back to bite them. I don't look at that as a mental lapse. It's just 3 bad plays that are made and 3 failed coverages. That's just off turnovers where they just can't get back and can't make the play, and players are all over the place. So, yeah, you could say it's mental. I don't think it's mental as what we've seen sometimes in the past, where they just fall apart. And I think it's just someone's trying to make a certain play. They failed to make that play, and other players are already planning for the puck to go out. You saw that goal. I'm trying to remember if it was the second or third one, where Horvat's along the boards. He thinks the play's out, and then it's not. And that's not mental for Horvat to get back. It just falls apart. But in terms of taking Lee's C off, that's a conversation that really has to stop, I think, right now, because I tried to explain it on Hockey Night in New York on Monday. You just look at when we go into the room to talk to players after games, we probably have to wait 5 or 6 minutes before we go in there. Whatever has to be said to the players is said, and then we talk to them after. So we're not getting the raw. Sometimes we get raw emotions and things like that, but what needs to be said is said. And for Anders Lee, he's never going to, maybe fans want him to throw players under the bus and hold people accountable in the media, but that's not the way Lee is. Lee knows that tonight's loss was bad. He actually took accountability for his line failing after they allowed the first goal to stop the bleeding. He said, we were out there, we didn't get the job done. He took accountability. And again, maybe people want to see Bo Horvat get the C. Bo Horvat could be a leader without stripping Anders Lee. There's a reason why Anders Lee's the captain. If the team had an issue with Lee being the captain, or Watt had an issue with Lee being the captain, Lee wouldn't be the captain. So that's not the issue. And again, one person, there's so many. If this was a really, really young team and Lee was the only veteran on the squad, or one of the older players on the roster, and the younger players just weren't buying into whatever Lee was selling, sure. But there are so many leaders in this room. You look at Clutterbuck, you look at Nelson, you look at Horvat, you look at Pajot, Palmieri. Then you have the young guys. Noah Dobson's always talking after games. He's always available. Look at those. Barzal has been such a leader this year. So it's not a Lee issue for leadership. If you want to talk about a leadership issue, it's everybody in the room, because there's so many voices in that room that, again, buying out Lee, they could do it. They're not going to do that. It's not to the point where he literally can't play in the NHL, and they're going to have to they keep their money on the books longer. I don't think it makes sense, especially with the cap going up. I don't think they're going to buy out Lee. Now, is he going to be your top line winger next year? Probably not. I don't know what they do. We have to see where they are at the deadline, see what they are after the season ends, and what happens over this next month and a half, 2 months. But yeah, I don't think there's any way Lee's bought out. Now, what I will say is, when the season started and Lee was struggling mightily, if that continued the entire year, then yeah, you have to think about buying Lee out. But that changed. Again, the points aren't there, but he's been able to help Horvat and Barzal, and that line got some, they got ramped up their production, things like that, and they became an elite duo, and Lee knew what to do on that line to allow them to flourish. And now maybe not the goals they want over the last couple of games here, but Barzal had an 8-game point streak that got snapped. Horvat's been great, and I don't think Lee people are making Lee to be the issue for why this team's failing. It's not Lee. It's a collective issue. And Lee might take the blame because he wears the C, but the leadership in that room is most of the guys in that room. So if you're talking about stripping Lee of the C, then you've got to talk about a whole entire roster change because it's everyone in the room's fault. Moving on to Matt Riviori. The Isles looked a little tired tonight. McLean was hustling and seemed fresh. You think that rough practice and hangovers from the Stadium Series are affecting their stamina? No. These are professional athletes. These are professional athletes. I don't think they were tired tonight. I mean, they 38 shots on goal and were generating chances the whole night. I don't think they looked tired. They just couldn't bury. Again, maybe the mistakes in their own zone are tired on certain shifts, but I don't think it's a tired group. And you could say they're an old group and they're a veteran group for sure. But every line that they have has speed. And I think maybe certain players maybe need some more rest. Maybe certain players are playing way too many minutes. You saw when Waugh first got here, he wasn't playing the fourth line. Whereas I was playing over 25 minutes. If you looked at Dobson's minutes over the last couple of games before tonight, I got to look back and see what he played tonight, but he was under the usual amount of minutes he played, so he's getting a little breather. But in games, some guys are getting taken out of the rotation, things like that. So maybe certain minutes weren't allocated properly, especially maybe in the second period there, but I don't think this is a tired group. These are professional athletes. It's not like we're playing men's league hockey and we're playing back-to-back games and we're gassed. These guys are peak athletes, physicality, the way they take care of their bodies. I don't think being tired is an excuse. I think, again, it's a veteran group, but the practices were every day. Sure, they went on the ice 7 days in a row, but they were 45-minute practices. It wasn't like 2 hours of grinding bag skating. I don't think that's an issue at all. I think that's more of a cop-out to what happened tonight. And again, you look at this game as a whole, outside of 32 seconds, which we really can't stop talking about because that was the game, but the Islanders technically played a good road game. They just could not solve Binnington, and they made a couple of mistakes, and the Blues buried. That's the NHL. Moving on back to the Twitter space, we're going to get back to Isles Den.
What up, Stefen? Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good now.
As you said before, like when it comes to these teams, like the whole team can't be blamed on one player.
Mm-hmm.
I think this roster has a lot of issues. I think Engvall being in the top six. I think Wahlstrom being in the lineup. Pajot not producing offensively to his $5 million, which brings me to a question.
Yeah.
Why, when the Islanders are in a situation where they need goals, why do they do these emergency lines and put Horvat with Lee and Wahlstrom and then put Barzal with Pajot and Holmstrom? I really don't understand, especially the Barzal line. I mean, you're putting Pajot with Barzal. Pajot's allergic to scoring. You have Holmstrom out there. I mean, he has some nice shorthanded goals, but he's not a noted goal scorer either. Don't understand that. Last point, anywhere you put Lee in the lineup, it's just been bad this season. First line, he holds them back. Might not be a bad line, but he just holds them back. You put him on the third line, he gets moved off the third line because the third line isn't doing well. I mean, by next season, I think he should be at least on the third line, maybe even the fourth line. If not, then bought out.
Yeah, so let's start with your first point, right? Let's go back to the line changes and why does what he does. One, it's to just try to see something work. Again, we've seen Barzal play with Pajot a little bit over Waugh's tenure so far, but it's also for matchups and things like that is when Barzal and Horvat on the line, they're going to get the best pairing, which I'm pretty sure was Parayko and Leddy, right? And then if you mix Barzal and Horvat up, then the other coach has to game plan for two weapons being separated. So Waugh's trying to not play just mental games with the Blues here, but he's trying to separate two players that need to really go against the best of the best the opponent has to offer, which likely means that certain players are going to go out against certain people, and it kind of gets the Blues out of the rhythm. Now, again, you saw tonight, the Islanders generated chances. A lot. A lot of chances. To go to your Lee point is, sure, the top line when Lee got put on there the second time, after starting there, going down to the third line, it didn't work, going back. That top line was legitimate top line, and Lee was doing what he had to do to get them to be working. Now, you could say Lee hasn't been great. He's not a 7x7 player, all that stuff. But yeah, I don't think he's going to be on the top line next year. I do think he'd be on the third line or the second. We'll see what happens. Maybe Engvall gets another shot on the top line. I don't think he does enough in the corners to really garner that kind of role there. But yeah, again, I think everyone wants to blame Lee for what's gone on. I'm not saying you're blaming only Lee, but that line's been great. They had 2 weak plays in their own zone that allowed 2 goals to happen. Of course, with Pelech and Pulak pairing as well. But yeah, I don't think the Lee issue is a very small issue, I think, for right now with what they're doing, because I don't think it was him on the plays. You look back and you can't look and say, oh, Lee's fault on both those goals. Does he get a breakaway and doesn't score? For sure. He said some things post-game that fans disagree with and maybe counteract what other people said in the room. For sure. I think, like you started off the chat with, is there's a lot of issues with the roster and the way it's constructed right now. And again, you're having issues where the third line hasn't been the shutdown line it used to be. The fourth line hasn't been the fourth line it's been in years past. The top line maybe needs another top elite player to really make that line a legitimate number 1 line in this league. And the second line at times, even though the last couple of games, second line was the only line not touched tonight. And they were the best line for the Islanders. And they were generating. Again, Palmieri could not bury tonight. They just feel like this has been a story of Palmieri being with the Islanders. You have the disallowed goals. You have all those things. And I thought that line was really good tonight. That being said, they need, in big moments, Lee scoring on a breakaway would have been huge there. Palmieri getting one of his 2 or 3 or 4 chances to fall. Noah Dobson, a beautiful slap pass to Holmstrom. It looked like the puck maybe bounced over his stick, but you look at this game and certain players that have come through this year. Palmieri's been one of the Islanders' best skaters since Wah got here. You score a couple goals early on Binnington, a guy that's fallen apart a lot when you get under his skin, you crash in that hard, things like that. You probably win this game. And again, the issue goes back to not trailing in this game. It's going down 3 goals in 32 seconds. That's what killed him. Again, Wah after the game said it was the failed clear on the penalty kill. That was the game. You could talk about the other 2 plays earlier and things like that, but yeah, it's a collective issue. But the Islanders, the way the roster is constructed right now, I'm not thinking we're going to see a lot of changes with this group. And you're going to, even let's say they brought in, name an elite player in this league. They bring in an elite player. Look at the Devils. The Devils bring in a goalie, right? It doesn't solve every issue they have, and it probably makes them allow a couple of goals less. But it's not changing the game. Whether the Islanders went and got Connor McDavid right now does not change how the third line plays. It doesn't change how maybe a certain player on defense plays. Think like one player probably doesn't fix the issues. If the Islanders are going to make the playoffs, no matter what they do at the deadline, it's going to be about the guys that are here. It's not going to be about one player. One player is not going to do enough. One player might help a little bit, but one player is not going to change the defensive structure and make an offensive player is not fixing the penalty kill. The offensive player you're bringing in is probably not going on the penalty kill, right? So I get it. People want them to buy and go get another defenseman and go get another forward, and that's great. But it's the guys that are signed long-term, the guys that are here on this roster that have to elevate their games in big moments and bear down. Again, Binnington played fantastic. He highway robbery a couple of times. But good teams find a way to overcome great goaltending. They do. There's games where, sure, the Islanders could have won this game 2-1. And it would have been like, yeah, we didn't score a lot of goals, things like that, but we got the 2 goals we needed. And we allow a goal. Sure, we allow 1 goal, but then we change the game there. And then instead of allowing 3 goals in 32 seconds, they allow 1 and they win the game. Or they allow 2 and find a way to come back. But going down by 3 is what killed them in this game. Again, 32 seconds of a road game. Take away the 32 seconds. The Islanders played a really good road game. But you can't, it's reality. They allow 3 goals in 32 seconds, and that's that. Moving on to Owowie. You talk about Rob being back next year. Do we know that will be the case? Is there any chance he gets frustrated with the roster and doesn't re-sign? Well, I'm assuming he signed a multi-year deal when he joined the team. There's no way he's getting fired. Now, the one caveat to that could be a new GM coming in and saying, I really don't like Wah. I would be really, really doubt that happens. Could he get frustrated with the roster and not re-sign? Yeah, but I think he was signed knowing that, hey, you're going to play out this year, see what happens, but we're getting you in here this year. That way you command everything, get things in order, look at the players on the roster for next year. I don't think it's a situation where Wah was coming in and saying, if I miss the playoffs, I'm going to walk away. We know that he walked away in Colorado because he didn't get managerial. It wasn't part of the managerial process or didn't get his voice heard enough by Sakic. But I don't think that's the situation at all the Islanders will be dealing with. I think Wah knew him right away when he got signed that he was being signed to coach this team and try to get them in the playoffs this year. And if that didn't happen or it did happen, whatever, be ready to go and have the team playing the way they have to play come next season. Just think about it. If Lane stayed on, Islanders make or miss, whatever, and he still gets fired at the end of this year, you hire Wah, let's say, in the summer. So during training camp, during the first couple of weeks of the season, Wa's system and structure has to be figured out by the players on the roster. Probably takes a little bit of time to get used to. Maybe a slow start, likely a slow start, and the Islanders are behind the 8 ball to start the 2024-25 season. Getting him in when they got him in, maybe a little too late to save this season and get it done. But the Islanders that are on the roster now, they're going to be here next year, should have his system and structure and the way he runs things down pat, the way there's no excuse for a slow start next year. Moving on to Rob Schachter. At what point does Malkin say something? The roster construction is based on filling UBS. That's true. They need players. They need fans in the seats for playoffs. They need that, especially when you get announced that you're hosting the All-Star game in 2026. To miss the playoffs this year, maybe we don't know what happens next year. Malkin has not spoken once since I think first signing on to join the Islanders ownership. But I don't think that means he hasn't spoken to Lou. I think they probably talk a lot. Again, I have no idea. We haven't spoken to Malkin at all. Lou is never going to talk about what he speaks about ownership. But yeah, Malkin's probably said stuff. I mean, Malkin probably I would say Malkin had a say in hiring Wa. Look at Lou Lamoriello as a GM in a year where, if they miss the playoffs, he could be out. I don't think ownership would have allowed him to hire a head coach that they didn't agree with if a playoff miss meant Lou was gone. We don't know exactly Lou's contract. We don't know what this season does mean and how it ends for Lou. But yeah, I would say that Malkin had a big say in hiring who came over instead of Lane. I don't know if there are other names on the table. I know Lou said that it was only Wa and that's it. But yeah, you look at Malkin definitely had a say in Wa hiring. I would probably guarantee that. Moving on back to Matt. I know Maggio was on fire in Bridgeport, and I hate to move him up too early as he's just finding his stride, but do you think he can come in and complement that first line in place of Lee before EOS? I don't know what EOS means, but Maggio, I would not rush him. Right now, he's finally finding his stride there. He's got 4 goals and assists over his last 4 games. Pretty sure has a point on the last 4 Bridgeport goals. And the speed in which he's playing in terms of skating is what's really impressing me. Again, we know he has the hands. He scored 56 goals in the OHL last year in his final year, winning OHL Player of the Year. We know he has the offensive talent. Now, his size is something that's probably going to be an issue. He's not a tall guy. I think he's under 5'10", but he's a warrior. I think he's a middle six, third-line guy with tremendous offensive upside. Could he play on the top line? I think he would have no issues, but he's not going to – again, it took him a lot of time to get used to the AHL speed. Now he's blowing by guys. So can he get to the NHL level, and really – work hard and make it as an NHL player? I think 1,000%. Talking with Lee and Pajot during training camp, they said he was such an easy player to play with. And that's a huge compliment for a guy that's 21. That was his first camp with the Islanders. I think it was his second camp. He got the year that he went undrafted, he did get signed or just invited to the Washington Capitals training camp. So he had been at one before, but Maggio is a very intelligent player. And that's something that Wa is going to love when Maggio is ready. But I think the coaching, we talked to Maggio for a story with the Hockey News, and Maggio said that he had such high expectations for himself. The coaching staff has had to temper his expectations like, hey, you're developing in these areas. We want you to work on your 200-foot game. Don't get discouraged when the points weren't coming. And now the points are coming. I wouldn't rush them. Unless the Islanders are completely out of it, then you call up the Dufours, the Maggios. Maybe you give Ishikov a chance. McLean obviously is maybe up longer term, but I wouldn't rush Maggio, especially if he's gonna make it. It's a diamond in the rough. Obviously, being a 5th-round pick, he's been great. After 4 or 5 games where he's really turned it up, I think the worst thing they could possibly do would be to call him up right now in the heat of a playoff race, where I don't think it'll take him a lot of time to get used to the NHL. And I think that's obviously the whole point of having prospects is to use them. I just think he's doing really well right now. That in the situation the Islanders are in right now and needing every point matters and just the structure and them, he hasn't played under Wa. He hasn't practiced under Wa. I think that might be a little tough for him to get used to because I don't know if Bridgeport's really done the Wa structure a lot this year yet. I think they're trying to implement it, but again, they just got Kowalski in there who's implementing his own stuff. So I would say wait on Maggio. It's a positive that he's really playing well, but I would wait on Maggio for now. My next call up, it probably would be Dufour. Maybe. I don't really know what the Islanders want to do. Again, I think the Islanders would have to be completely out of it and maybe move pieces, which we just talked about before, move pieces of the family, Palmieri, Pajot, guys like that, to even give those guys an opportunity. But again, if the Islanders are moving on from those players, I think it's to sell, to also buy. I don't think we're selling those guys off to player prospects. Moving on to Twitter, we're going to go to Brian G. Go for it, Brian.
Hey, Stefen, thanks for taking this.
No problem.
This team just, Patrick Waugh is running into the same problem that Barry Trotz ran into, that Lane Lambert ran into. It's a talent problem, and that falls at the GM's feet. He just really needs to go. The whole front office, they need like a new perspective, because Waugh's trying to implement this new system, but some of these guys can't even skate anymore. Some of these guys are just so used up too. Like Clutterbuck, I love him to death, but just I think they just need to move him to like a Stanley Cup contender, because the Islanders aren't going anywhere. They're a fringe 8th seed team. Then even if they do get in, they're going to get pummeled by somebody again.
Well, I don't think it's. See, I'm just going to mute it just because there's a lot of background, but I appreciate the questions. Again, you make the playoffs. I don't think you could just sit here and say the Islanders would get killed in the playoffs. Teams that make the playoffs, you never know what could happen. That being said, Waugh was brought in to solve the energy issue, the compete issue. And sure, maybe there's a couple of games where, we look at the Calgary game where at effort at times seemed to be lacking. We look at the Seattle game and the focus wasn't there. But mostly under Waugh, when he first came in and brought accountability back, and the players were like troops getting ready to go to war and at camp and boot camp, things like that, is the players were responding well to what Waugh was saying. But it's a completely different thing from energy to progress to execution. And again, structure in 5, outside of the mistakes in the 32 seconds, their structure was great. They weren't allowing much. And so they're buying in. But I agree. There's a couple of players on this team that have been passengers under Waugh, and there's some players that are driving plays. And you know who those players are. You're watching the games. And I do think, again, Waugh was brought in to bring energy. Wasn't in here to magically, he wasn't going to come in here and fix every issue the Islanders had. Some of those, again, you just said, the players under Waugh, they're falling into the same situation they fell in with Lambert, where fundamentals are costing them games. Waugh can't come in and immediately fix fundamentals. Some of these guys are just the guys that they are at the NHL level at this point. Opening up, getting back in the D zone, all those things is, Waugh's going to have to get those players to play it. Sorry, I'm just going to mute you again. You can talk, but just give me 1 second. So yeah, I think Waugh was brought in just to fix the energy thing and wake this group up and bring accountability back. But I think after the season, Waugh's going to go to Lou and say, here's a list of players that can play my system. Here's a list of players that cannot play my system. And here's a players that I think you could go out and try to get that I think could help and play the structure I want to play. It's not like Trotz, because I mentioned this over and over again, but it's worth mentioning that Trotz came and looked at this roster and built a system that fit this roster. They didn't have the offensive talent to be an offensive team. He looked at the group and said, if we're going to win hockey games, it's defense. And he got the team, he got the players to buy into the defensive structure he implemented here. It wasn't the structure he had in DC. He implemented it here, and it paid off for years, for a couple of years, back-to-back semifinal runs. Lambert's here. He tries to make them more offensive. They have a more offensive team. They could do that, but they just forgot how to defense when that happened. And then Waugh's coming in, not looking at the roster and saying, this is what we have to play. He brought in his own structure, his own system, and said, we're going to play this. And you're either going to play it or you're not going to play it. That's essentially what it seemed like when he was hired, because it hasn't been about, there's no compromise with, I was going to bring this system in here and now I'm doing this. No, he has a structure. He wants to play a fast game. He wants to play a game that fans are proud of. He wants active D. He wants the D to stop collapsing. He wants going for the kill shot, things like that. He wants to play well defensively enough where fans say, wow, the Islanders are good defensively. But there are a lot of teams in the NHL that are good defensive teams that aren't defensively structured. They're just good defensively. The problem with the Islanders this year is that they were inept defensively. And that's the issue. The Islanders don't have to be an amazing defense, elite defense under Waugh. They have the offense to counteract average defense. The problem is the defense too much this year hasn't been average. It's been well below average. We're putting the penalty kill in with that. That's the issue that Waugh's running into, is that he has a structure that a lot of the guys on this roster can play, but the guys that aren't consistently, it's holding the team down. And the first thing Bo Horvat said when we spoke to him about the Waugh hiring is that he wants everybody to be pulling the same rope. He wants 5-man team out there. And he goes, we need everyone to pull the rope in the right direction. And there's too many games, whether it's a great player that makes one mistake in a game. Again, a game like tonight where Binnington's so good, one mistake and one goal against killed them. My dad would always tell me, I'm a goalie, that, if I lost 1-0 in a game or 2-0 in a game or 10-0, it didn't matter. We didn't score. And sure, maybe down 1-0 is a different mindset than going down 3-0. Obviously, I understand that, but the Islanders didn't score. And so one mistake killed them. And that's that. So I think for Waugh, it's all about getting the player, finding out which players can play the way he wants and finding out which players can't. And you're going to see that till the end of the year. You know already the players that are struggling to do what he wants. Now, the question is until the season ends, are there guys that can fix the way they play? And that's what this time's for. That's why Wah was brought in early in the sense of before the end of the season. Can guys figure out his way? Can Lou see, all right, this guy's maybe struggling to buy into what Wah is doing, but you're seeing growth. You're seeing that progression. You need to see that, okay, he can be a fit next year. But there's other guys that Lou and Wah are going to talk about at the end of the year that said he never bought it or he never could figure it out. I hate to say it, and Oliver Wahlstrom's playing better. Don't get me wrong, but we saw it under Barry Trotz. He struggles to understand the systems. He just does. And Wah needs someone that's so fundamentally sound. He needs a lot of guys, everyone in his roster, to just be fundamentally sound. And again, Wahlstrom may be finding it a little bit over the last handful of games, but a lot of what's played Wahlstrom from developing under Trotz, under Lane, early on being benched under Wah was just the fundamentals. And you either have the IQ or you don't. Julien Gauthier, who has much of the speed that he brought and things like that. So I think that's what Wah and Lou are going to do after the season is really look at the group. All right, we're going to go back to the Twitter space here. We're going to go to Mike.
Hi, Stefen.
How are you?
It did one of those cutoff things again. I was still listening to you.
You're good.
These things are brutal, man. I don't know why they still do that. I guess you got to do 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Are we talking about Mississippi's or?
Yeah, it's what it feels like. I don't know. I was listening to you, and I'm like, oh, no, not again. But I just thought I would throw you a different question, probably something you haven't gotten. I don't know if anyone's asked you this yet, Steph, but do you think there's any specific reason why Wah hasn't went with different lines? Just before you answer, like to paint the team with a broad stroke so far, it seems like the top six can get it done, and the bottom six just never can. I'll let you go.
Yeah. I would love to. I guess, yeah. Why Wah hasn't switched it up? You're talking about in-game or
No, just like in general, because to me, this would be the perfect time to be like, hey, let's see if Brock Nelson does well with Horvat and Barzell.
Right.
Like, let's see if this team can go out and just beat teams up. Kind of like what the Blues are running. I saw a little bit of that tonight when I did watch. You even look at the Devils, right, who have been struggling. You had Jack Hughes on the second line, Timo Meier on the third line, and I think for sure. Fine, you're like, what are they doing? Jeez, man.
And I think a lot of it has to do with matchups and things like that. I think he really wants to, outside of in-game situations where, again, I think the reason he separates Horvat and Barzal is to kind of throw the St. Louis Blues and matchups out a little bit. Yeah, separating those guys and just something different, a new look for them. Nelson playing on the wing, we've talked about it a lot. I think me and you have definitely talked about it that, Nelson with Horvat and Barzal, when you need a goal, things like that, why he doesn't do that. I don't think he really wants to deviate a lot from his lines. I think he likes most or more often not the way they're constructed. Tonight, obviously, changing the way he changed what he did. We'll see if it carries over. We know that he tried Engvall. Remember, he tried Engvall up there for one game, switching Engvall and Anders. And then he ended up going back like 3 or 4 shifts after. So I think Wah's trying to learn the group, and it's going to take time for him to learn the group. But I think next year, depending on what happens and who's brought in, you could see a much different lineup than you see this year. I think you might have to. Now, that's if the goals don't fall. You look at the Islanders have been scoring goals, maybe not at an amazing rate, but they're scoring over 3 goals a game. There's a lot of games where they're losing games when they score 5 or they're, blowing leads or going to overtime and things like that. I don't think the offense is the issue. Tonight, again, you look at the expected goals for 4.29. There were chances to bury that. It just didn't happen. So I don't think tonight's situation where the changing up the lines was because the chances weren't there. It was just he wanted a new look and maybe to throw off St. Louis. But, I think maybe we'll see new lines going forward. I don't think the offense is really the issue. It's the defense is what's been really killing them in the PK.
I think that also comes from the offense, Steph. You have a couple guys, like someone just said before me, that can't skate on the team, and it becomes very obvious when you play man on man. It just makes it look worse. Than it did before. I think Lane was covering up some of those bad, defensive, offensive forwards, but now it's just, and I understand like the expected goals for and everything, but Waz had 12 games of lead now. What does he have? 1 goal. At some point, I hope he goes, let's focus on what next year is going to look like. Because I don't think Anders is going to be there. I doubt it.
Well, I don't think he's going to be on the top line. I think that was clear early on when they put him on the third line this year with Lane. Again, it's a matter of who they get. I don't think Pierre Engvall for what that line needs. I think that, when Lambert would put Lee back on there or Waugh would, have Lee up there, is that he needs a net front. I think that line needs a net front presence. The problem is when your net front presence isn't bearing the chances, that's the issue, because then what's the point, right? Might as well have speed, things like that. So, yeah, I think it ultimately depends who the Islanders go and get in that spot, because if they don't alter the roster, right, then what are Waugh's choices? I don't think Lee could play a shutdown third line role, but that being said, is Pajot on the team next year? Is that third line a shutdown line? Who's on the fourth line? Does your fourth line become a shutdown line again? So I think your question will be answered in time. I wish I had an answer for you, but I think it has a lot to do with what they decide to do at the deadline, at the draft in terms of trading, and then how it looks next season, because right now I feel like they're slim in terms of options.
I just had to bring it off, Steph, because I thought it was odd. Yeah. That we kind of just, and I understand expected goals for, I get all that stuff. I love it. But at some point it'd be like, let's just try something different. This is do or die, so you might as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Right. It's a good thought there. And I just think right now they don't want to do too much to disrupt other lines. Like, I think the second line was really good tonight. I think back-to-back games, they've looked pretty good. And again, Lee's in a tough – well, the Islanders are in a tough spot with Lee because they're not going to bench him. They're not going to strip him to C. He's not going to play the fourth line. I don't think you play the third line shutdown line, which is what that line is still right now. So he's got to play in your top six. And right now, again, the options are he's either playing on your top line or you're separating the second line, which has looked much better under Waugh. So I think Waugh's got to be smart about what he does. But again, if they had more pieces, maybe better depth prospect options right now, then they would go that route and change things up. I just don't think they can right now. Moving on here, we're going to do a couple more. We're going to go to Jake Rappaport. Jake, just unmute your mic for me. All right, we're going to move on. Sorry, Jake. We're going to move on here to Chris Russo. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
It's just really interesting to listen to this because, I feel like everyone's just hitting the panic button, but, we all got to realize that tonight was just one of those bad hockey nights. You got a goalie standing on his head, seeing a beach ball out there. I know the Islanders have been incredibly frustrated. I think this a lot, again, goes to Lou. He should replace the coach sooner. I feel like they're still trying to get rid of those bad habits. I think they're doing a good job. I think they really did play 58 minutes of good hockey. Look at the stats. They got a ton of shots. They just couldn't get them by.
Yeah.
If you look at the numbers, they got 26 games left for the year. They realistically have to score. They got to get 40 points, so they got to win 20 games.
Yeah.
To get to that 100-point mark. 15 of those games are winnable. 15 of those games are winnable.
All these games,
you just got to go. You got a 500 in the next 10 of the hard teams that you're playing to make the playoffs. They're not that far. Everyone's got to calm down.
And that's the funny part with how this season has gone, from the up and downs, the 16 third period blown leads to everything that's gone wrong. The Islanders could still make the playoffs. And I think people, look at the losses tonight. And again, I think you make a great point. Taking away what happened last game, look at this game. And again, like I said, it's a good road game. You generate 38 shots on goal at 5-on-5 outside. Again, 32 seconds of bad hockey is like we talked about with the Islanders when they played 55 minutes of good hockey. This was better. This was 58 minutes and change, 59 and change outside the penalties where the refs just seem to catch everything. And we don't expect that ever. They might have been a perfect ref score, but outside of that, you just look at the way the Islanders played and it's a good hockey game. And I think people are going to flip out about those comments, but they played great. I mean, you have to score to win games for sure. But in terms of structure at 5-on-5 outside of those 32 seconds, the penalty kill was much better. The chances were there. I mean, they had chances to really tap some stuff in that they just couldn't. Varlamov bailed them out a lot. And yeah, I think it was a good hockey game that the Islanders could have won. And I think to your point is the Islanders could win all these games. That's where I go back to that trailing fewest minutes trailed in game. Everyone's like talent. They don't have talent. That's part of closing games out as talent. Sure, to an extent, but untalented teams aren't trailing the fewest minutes in the NHL. Look at perfect example. Every other team on that top 10 list is a playoff team, like a bona fide playoff team. That should tell you immediately that the talent's there. It's just living up to potential is the issue. We talk about potential with prospects all the time. If potential doesn't turn into the actual player, it doesn't matter. So the Islanders have the talent, but are they a great hockey team right now? No, because they're not finding ways to close things out. It's a baseball team without a closer. It's a baseball team that is a really good stacked team that just doesn't have the final way to close. That doesn't mean the team's not talented. That means one area of their game is very flawed. Now, obviously, the Islanders have games that are flawed. Have a lot of things in their games that are flawed that they're trying to work through, but it's the same point. It's like, this is a talented hockey team, and you could argue that with me all the time. And the whole point of these chats are to bring about conversation. And again, that's why I don't host these chats to tell everybody why I'm right and you're wrong, because I'm not. I put words on paper and I cover the team, and I have maybe insight into the room, but we're all hockey fans. We all have opinions on how things run. No one is the ultimate, no one's an expert. There's no NHL experts. Everyone's just hockey fans. They watch games. Everyone sees things differently. And I just give my take and want it back. So I agree with a lot of the fans that are so mad. I get it. That's why I host these things. I know tonight was going to be a night where a lot of people wanted to talk. But I just look at the game and say, they could build on this game. 32 seconds. And scoring early obviously would have done a lot for them. And coming off the Pittsburgh game is tough. And then coming off the Ranger game is tough. That you wanted one of those wins where it was a no doubt about it win. And I think that's what Islander fans know. This team's good enough to have that. It's just getting it. And that's what the whole thing with consistency is. They don't, to go make the playoffs because of where they are in the standings, there has to be a win streak at some point. There just has to be. There doesn't have to win 20 of the, they don't have to win out the rest of the year. And given teams like, again, tonight, the Lightning lose, the Devils lose. Those are huge losses. And sure, well, the Islanders didn't take advantage because they didn't win, but they also didn't fall back farther. Again, Detroit won for sure, and they're chasing Detroit now at 6 points or whatever. But it's not like every other team won, and now the Islanders are screwed. They could still make the playoffs. They could still win games. They still have games, games in hand on some guys. Sure, they could definitely miss the playoffs. 1,000% miss the playoffs. They could also make the playoffs and go on a run. And everyone can say, well, they can't win a cup. I think you never know. That's the whole point. Everyone's like, well, no, you never know. Get to the dance and you dance. Goalie gets hot. A team gets hot. Penalty kill gets hot. One player gets hot. Ilya Sorokin turned into Patrick Roy on a playoff run, right? Semyon Varlamov turns into Patrick Roy on a playoff run. And we see something with Vegas where even you have no idea. But you got to get there to prove the haters wrong or whatever that is. And the Islanders, the only way they're making it is if they clean up the penalty kill and they stop falling up these 30, 40 second lapses of a couple of goals. I mean, we saw it against Colorado earlier in the year where they were going to take a lead to the third period and now 2 goals in 13 seconds. Those kill you because it's not just trailing. Those kill you. And the Islanders have to find a way to do damage control. And that's why Watt called his timeout. But again, if the Islanders are going to go on a win streak and make the playoffs, they got to figure it out now. But now and go and beat Tampa on Saturday. You can't have one win and then a loss. That's what the issue is you can have games like this where you play really well and lose. But it's because of the 2 games prior where, again, you got the win against Pittsburgh. To win tonight to get 4 points over the last 2 games is monumental. To lose the way they lost against the Rangers and throw a point away, to go into Pittsburgh and barely get a win, but get a win. Tonight was a night to get that win. That would have been huge for this group. And again, it's hard for them to hold their heads low hang their heads because they played a very good game. They're into a very hot goaltender, and the mistakes they made in 32 seconds all came back to bite them. But the season's not over because of this one loss. Now, again, 4 or 5 losses in a row, you make it hard. But we saw this team last year. Again, it's a little bit different spot, but we saw this team figure it out in the second half after the All-Star break and catch fire. And the Islanders have to catch fire to make the playoffs, and there's certainly time to do that before it's way too late.
I was going to say, this isn't the 08-09 Islanders. I feel like people are talking like it is. There's no talent. They have a ton of talent. Lou can fix this without trading the first-round pick, too. I think they can get some players, ship some people out, and, I still think they got a chance. So,
and again, there's not a lot of positive people, but it's you have to be realistic and look at the standings. And until the Islanders have an elimination sign next to their name, they're in it, but they have to put together a win streak. We'll do 2 more and we'll wrap it up. We'll go to Islanders Never Say Die podcast and we'll finish things off with Michael Radigan. So Islanders Never Say Die podcast up first.
Hey, what's up, Stefen? How are you, buddy?
Good.
Oh, man. Could be better. I will say this. I don't know. I've been doing some thinking as to why is it that we lead games, but we consistently blow leads. I think when you look at the style of play, it's noticeably different when we have a lead late in games. I've said this before. It's almost like we're trying to sit back on our heels and play for a loser point at least and guarantee a point. And I think this team, it's not the same team of 3, 4, 5 years ago under Barry Trotz. They don't have the same exact, I'd say maybe legs to keep up at the same pace energy-wise as maybe it was required to do prior. We do get goals. I think we are, and I say this in the nicest way possible, an unbelievably opportunistic team. Like, I even look at that Rangers game where I was like, oh man, that puck goes bouncing free. Matt Barzal gets it, and he buries that. And it's like, you see a few of those items when teams make mistakes, and this even dates back to the Trotz days. Our team always finds a way to capitalize. But when teams start to button up their play and they start to be more focused on the minutia of the game, you start to see that, hey, that opportunistic, those opportunistic opportunities don't come that often. And, I think that's really what it is more than anything else. It's not on goaltending. Defensively, I mean, yikes. I'm not sure there's too much else besides, we'll have breakdowns in our own zone. On the penalty kill, we've been miserable, this season. I think, unfortunately, I've been very vocal about this. We're going to have to take steps back in order to go forward. This deadline is going to be an important one. Last year we didn't sell off pieces on expiring deals. This year we don't have many expiring deals, but free agency, at least the trade deadline pool is very limited. You can maximize what you've got here. I think buying at this year's deadline would be detrimental again to the team's future. I don't see how we buy with the situation that we're currently in.
Yeah, no, well, we'll start your first one of being opportunistic. You mentioned Trotz, and it's a perfect example. Trotz's whole thing was shut down defense. When you get your chances, score. And what killed them in the playoffs is that when they got their chances, they didn't. They come up a goal short twice, right? And then you look at under Lane, and it was, all right, offense. And defense, again, wasn't great. But the offense was scoring goals. And then even under Waugh here, he wants to activate the D. He wants to create more of those chances. But tonight, again, there were chances. The Blues didn't play a great defensive game. The Islanders didn't get to the front of the net. There's a couple of times where the Islanders shot sharp angle shots, 4 rebounds on purpose. And I know Pulak did one where he shot at pad and Barzal just couldn't get to it. Or they crashed the net and Dobson's making a play on the puck towards goal and Holmstrom's right there. And again, those opportunistic chances went by the boards. And you look at the Blues, another perfect example. Not a ton of chances the entire night, but 3 mistakes, and they make the most of it. That's the definition of opportunistic. And in terms of the deadline, again, what they should do and what they will do, 2 different things. Obviously, the Islanders don't have prospect pool that's high up. And again, they could have prospects that turn out to be legitimate prospects, but they're probably a couple of years away from even becoming that. They could sell high. Again, if Scott Laughton's getting you a first-round pick, Brock Nelson's bringing you back at least 2. They could trade a guy like Cal Clutterbuck, Pajot, Cizikas, Palmieri, 2 playoff caliber teams. There's value in that. They could move a speedy Sebastian Aho just because an extra D-man on the back end, things like that. But again, I think they would only sell to trade players and get assets to bring in other players. I don't think it's going to be a clear sell. And you might think that's wrong for the organization, but Lou wants to win right now. He's always going to want to win right now. Waugh wants to right now. That's why he was brought in. So I would be very, very shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if certain players that were been part of this group are traded. I just would be shocked if it was a sell with not at least the belief that, all right, let's say we're getting 2 first-round picks back for Nelson, that they don't immediately flip those. Again, that's what I think they would do if they go that, or Pajot or Palmieri, whatever they get back. If it's not in a package, like, hey, we're giving you Pajot and a first for X player. Like, that's what I would see happening, or getting the assets back for those players and getting a player back. But again, I think what Lou would try to do is find someone that could help, obviously, this year. But if he can't, and he thinks that he can get players now, and maybe will fail to get those players that he wants in the offseason or at the draft, he wants to give Wild the best team to compete next year and also win this year. But if he's not going to win this year and make the playoffs, he's not going to waste and sit around when he could add to help next year and just sit back and just sell this out. I don't see him doing that.
Here's the thing. I don't have an issue if he's selling to bring in young players, or he's selling off assets to try to acquire draft capital to bring in young players. What I don't want to see happen is we buy at this year's deadline for guys who are in a contract season, having a career year. Sure. I mean, the list goes on. Those are not the right fit for us. They're not the right fit for the future of the organization. And as I mentioned before, Lou, if he's not looking out for the future as well, is not being a good steward for that. He's not the right answer. Now, I will say one more item. I wonder when the fan base will finally start admitting that it was not Lane Lambert's issue why the team was systematically blowing lead after lead after lead. It's all on the players.
Well, I think that's clear. I think for sure it was always the players. And it's easier to fire a coach than the players. I think what hurt Lane was the accountability thing. Is that Lane wasn't, again, not his fault that certain players weren't living to their potential at all. That being said, there were chances for Lane to hold players accountable, and we never saw that. And I think that, at the end of the day, is what cost Lane his job. Practices under Waugh are night and day from what they were. I mean, it's mind-boggling to watch. It's not just line rushes for these are line rushes for 25 minutes to get the fundamentals back. And there was too many players, I don't want to say getting away with not doing the little things, but there wasn't an emphasis on that stuff in practice. And Waugh, I mean, it's cliche, you practice like you play, but you're seeing right now that it wasn't just a coaching issue. The players are the players, and you just can't fire a whole team, which is why I think Waugh coming in was the whole point was, let's see if at least the energy part was on Lane. And pretty much what Waugh's brought in and got them to wake up. You had that culture shock, that honeymoon phase. But more often than not in these games, outside maybe a couple of games where effort like that we saw against Minnesota where the Islanders just stopped playing. We have not seen that to that level, which we saw a lot under Lane, or too much, I should say, under Lane. We have not seen it under Waugh. And I think Lou wanted to see that this team, effort can't be an issue. But now that effort's not an issue, now you're seeing the other, okay, well, this was the same issue under Lane, so we got to look at this. This was the issue, but it was the effort issue that I think cost Lane the job, because when players weren't trying, or there were games where players were taking shifts off, there wasn't accountability for that.
I think there are definitely time periods, and I won't hog the space. I think there are definitely time periods where certain players exert effort, but the same passengers are still the same passengers that were the passengers under Lane Lambert. And I'm not sure how much a passionate coach, right? As I mentioned before, this should be the best hockey we're ever going to see out of this group. Players trying to make a good first impression for a brand new boss, a brand new head coach. I don't care about us coming out and getting, curb stomped today. It's going to happen sometimes. But it's just, right, we're not seeing immediate results. That's why you fire a guy midseason, is because you want to see immediate results. Yeah. We're not seeing that under Patrick Waugh. I don't know. Until when you resist what is, that's when suffering begins. And our team and our general manager are resisting to admit what we are, which is an average to slightly above average team at times. And just to be honest and simple, that's not good enough to win a Stanley Cup. Until we admit that, we're never going to be able to get over this issue.
Appreciate that. Yeah, great chat as always. We're going to end this thing here with Mike O'Radigan.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Hey, thanks for taking this, and thanks for holding this. Always appreciate the work you do. I'll make it quick. I know I'm the last one, I believe. Just referring, I think there's a lot of talk about how the talent on this team. I actually think this top six is probably the most talented they've had, including out of the Eastern Conference Finals team. And on paper, if you look at this defense, it should be a solid NHL defense group, but they're not playing like it. So that has been an issue. But at what point, I know, Waugh has to work with the roster he has right now before any deadlines, moves are made or anything. But at what point does he try just different personnel on the PK? Because it's obviously not working. This is a disastrous PK. At what point does he try putting, I don't know, someone else out there? Like,
Clutterbuck looks very, and I know a lot of people are ragging on him. I love the guy too, but he looks very slow out there on the PK. He's not playing a tight box. You see him drift up to the points a lot, and it doesn't look like he's playing a tight structure. And for a lot of the PK too. But at what point do you think we'll try to change the personnel just to get something going with the PK? Because you can't be giving up a power play goal every night, 2 power play goals every night, and expect to make the playoffs. And it's still right there for them, like you mentioned. The teams ahead of them are very flawed too. Yeah,
so I wrote up at this the other day is that you look at last year and the power play was terrible all year long. And it took until the playoffs for Johnny McClain to take Dobson off as the quarterback of the power play unit. And this year, PK has been terrible all year. And sure, there have been injuries that have changed the PK, things like that. Penalty killers taking penalties, but they have rocked the same penalty kill without change. Now, in the outdoor game, one change they made was that Holmstrom didn't play any penalty kill minutes. Scott Mayfield's limited, I think, against Pittsburgh, his penalty kill minutes were down, or he was like the 3rd or 4th defenseman, and usually he's playing maybe more minutes. So, yeah, I don't know when he's going to change it. I think the penalty kill obviously was better against Pittsburgh. They're pretty good tonight with the amount of penalties, the amount of minutes they played. So I think for sure he's going to hopefully hope that they all work out, but yeah, he has to make changes. I think putting Barzal out there at points might make sense, especially late in games. Just, Barzal has the most he has not committed the most turnovers. He has stripped the most amount of players this year. I'm blanking on the word, but he's created the most turnovers in the NHL. Takeaway. Thank you. Jeez, it's late. Takeaways in the NHL. You're on the penalty kill. Barzal has speed where he's going to probably get shorthanded chances. And if the power play is going to struggle, might as well score on special teams on the PK. And I don't know, again, who he would replace. I think if Holmstrom's coming off, you can put Barzal out there. Maybe put him on your second penalty kill. I just think it comes to a point where Barzal wants to be a leader, and he's spoken about it a lot. Put him in those rules. Noah Dawson told us at the beginning of the year that he wants to play on the penalty kill. And when Pelech, Pulak, and Mayfield were out, he was on the penalty kill. So I think maybe you could see Dobson. I think for Scott Mayfield, the best thing they could do for him is just limit his minutes, make him earn it. I think he's played solid 5-on-5, gets beat a lot. We saw the penalty kill the other day and where he was going on that Pettersson goal. But yeah, I think their changes have to be coming if the Islanders want to make the playoffs. But I do have to wrap this thing up. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Just a reminder, guys, to watch the postgame show live on YouTube, on our Elmonters channel. Definitely tune in there at the Elmonters on Twitter. You could go to the Twitter page there, but on YouTube, it's the Elmonters. Like and subscribe to our Substack every day, every morning. You'll get the latest content from the hockey news, from the Elmonters, the videos, all those great things. Really appreciate the support, and we really want to build that up. We have a lot of cool things planned for the future. Definitely subscribe to get alerts. You'll get alerts when we go live, things like that. So the Islanders, we don't know if they'll practice tomorrow, Saturday. They play an afternoon game against Tampa Bay Lightning as they try to shake this one off, move forward with still a lot of time left. 2 weeks. As of today, it's 12/10. 2 weeks until the March 8th NHL trade deadline. We'll talk more. Thanks for tuning in, guys.